Bear Manor Media presents Final Cuts, the last films of 50 great directors, by Nat Segaloff, read for you by the author. Considering how hard they had to fight to make their first films, no wonder most directors hang on as long as they can before making their last. The reasons a career ends vary. Some directors die or become infirm. Some rack up too many flops to get financing. Some can't find backing for projects they want to do and can't summon interest for those that are offered. And some just get tired of the old Hollywood BS. But many great filmmakers find themselves shut out of a system they once dominated. But there's a long list of directors who outlived their filmographies. Orson Welles took acting jobs and plowed his salary into his own pictures. Fred Zinnemann had to recite his credits to studio tyros too young to know them and too lazy to look them up. Billy Wilder found himself interviewed, awarded, and quoted for the last 21 years of his life, but never hired, even though his career included Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, Lost Weekend, Irma la Douce, and Sunset Boulevard. "I didn't suddenly get stupid," he once said. This book chronicles the last films of 50 great directors who had substantial careers before. In many cases, the reason is purely physical. Filmmaking is so demanding that it's predominantly a young person's craft. Even though older, more experienced directors can operate more efficiently, the stamina to stand for 14 hours a day, command a crew, engage actors, and wield the immense mechanism of production demands an endurance that few possess in their later years. For every Hitchcock, Altman, Buñuel, Bergman, Huston, or Eastwood who works into his 70s or 80s, there are scores more who hang up their megaphones in their 60s. A few years can make an enormous difference on the set, not to mention in getting insurance or prying budgets from nervous studio executives half the director's age. In what other art form is youth more valued than maturity? Most of what follows is being collected for the first time. When the filmmakers in this book began their careers, production news was provided to studio-controlled fan magazines and was spun, if not wholly invented, to feed the system at the expense of history. By the time of these final films, however, motion picture scholarship had become established, and archivists were preserving the documents of movie companies and those who work for them. Remarkably little of the material that follows has been explored beyond perfunctory citations in the penultimate chapters of various biographies. All of the directors in these pages created estimable bodies of work. Most were products of the studio system in its heyday who found themselves unable to adapt to the independent financing, production, and distribution circus that replaced it in the 1960s. Some, like Robert Altman, John Huston, and Orson Welles, were already fiercely independent and simply entered a new creative phase. Even directors who were known for their bravado, like Howard Hawks, William Wellman, Raoul Walsh, and George Stevens, faced at some point a fatal disconnect with their public. The stories behind these films are as touching as they are varied. George Cukor heard the clock ticking while he was making Rich and Famous. Robert Altman hid his cancer while he was finishing A Prairie Home Companion. Alfred Hitchcock's Family Plot was moderately successful, but his dear friend Lew Wasserman, who ran the studio, prevailed on him to prepare another film, even though both men knew it would never be made. There is a perception that late films are less interesting than those made in a director's prime. Not so. Fully half of the titles in this book won plaudits on their initial release, and even today would make current filmmakers envious. In order to be included in this book, which is admittedly U.S.-centric, a director must meet 4 criteria. He has to be dead. The last film has to have been a scripted theatrical feature. He must have enjoyed a substantial career. There must exist sufficient documentation to tell the story of making the film. The stories that follow remind us of how much what goes into making a movie never appears on the screen, primarily the posturing and positioning. Let's call it BS, shall we? Within the corporate art form known as motion pictures. Every film is a struggle even before the camera rolls, and it's astonishing how many obstacles are placed in the way of experienced and talented filmmakers by people who are neither. The directors in this audiobook displayed a combination of skill, gumption, and luck. But they also had the good fortune to work at a time when Hollywood was interested in making movies instead of product. In a business that wants to be an art form, creative tension gets the juices flowing. Perhaps directors should treat each film as if it could be their last. That way it might be good enough that it won't be.